Hello everyone, my name's Wilfrid Wood. I'm a sculptor. I've got a studio in Hockney, and I make things totally by hand, dogs, people, all sorts. Zuckerberg, big things like that, little tiny doggies. Make a lot of stuff out of plasticine. This was a rough for my friend Dawn that I made a sculpture of. I make a few figures like this sort of thing, and the occasional plumber. Have a good look. But I want to talk about drawing. I've never talked before about drawing to a big group. I don't know if anyone's got any interest in drawing at all, really, but I'm doing loads of it at the moment. As a kid, of course, I drew Daleks and monsters and all that sort of thing, as kids do, and a lot of natural history. Got a good mark from the teacher. But it's not surprising that as a kid, I drew a lot of natural history type subjects because my dad was a natural history illustrator. That's him with one of his snakes. He used to keep snakes and frogs in the house at home. And he did these sorts of drawings of snakes. So they're very finely observed, intensely seen drawings of animals mainly. He does lots of frogs as well, and sometimes snakes eating frogs. He went to art school in the 50s to goldsmiths, where drawing was like a major part of an art school education. Everybody did life drawing. And he was taught by somebody called Betty Swanwick, who was an illustrator at the time. And I knew her growing up as an old lady. She did this picture, which is an ode to smoking. She smoked about, for God knows, 60 a day, something like that. A doctor told her to give up smoking. She gave up and took up cigars, which she inhaled. This is a picture she did of all her animals, and Jobo, the parrot in the middle, used to imitate her cough. So I went round to her. She used to give me, age 14 or something like that, a massive gin and tonic. We'd have quite a laugh. She would start laughing and then start coughing, and the parrot imitated her cough, so it'd be like like that, and then the parrot would be going and Betty would be going and the whole thing got totally out of hand as a teenager. It was made quite an impression. So these are the sort of pictures that she did, kind of ethereal, moonlit landscapes with people in these kind of diaphanous robes. And she did a lot of drawing. They were kind of visionary pictures, but drawing was absolutely central to her practice as an artist, as it was to my dad and all the people that I grew up with. And basically, I was part of it, but I was also pretty fed up with it at times because it was drummed into me to rather too great an extent. And then things like this came along, Damien Hirst. Who also went to goldsmiths, where Betty and my dad, Betty had been teaching, my dad was a student. And people like Betty and my dad were horrified by this sort of thing, absolutely hated it. As for Tracy Emin's bed, it made my dad absolutely apoplectic with rage. If it ever came on telly, he'd be literally furious, which is quite a sort of funny thing. I don't think people get quite so cross about art anymore. We've kind of seen so much, and people are, on the whole, pretty blasé about it. And stuff like Cy Twombly or something like that, my dad would say, "What is this mark making?" So anyway, that was all my influences. I was at college. That's me looking nice and fat as a 21-year-old or 20-year-old at St. Martin's. I did graphic design. And I did a lot of drawings, rather sort of plain, tentative drawings of friends of mine, all very detailed architectural type of stuff, really very straight-laced. But then I knew someone who worked at Spitting Image, which some people may know. It was a TV program, very notorious at the time. They did puppets of politicians, celebrities, that sort of thing. That's me when I was working there. That's Jeremy Clarkson. That's about, without his wig. So that's about 1993 or something like that. It just shows how long he's been going. And this was my boss, Roger Law, who was great, really big character. And what was so great about Spitting Image was that it was vulgar, it was different. My parents disapproved of it. But the problem was that my dad had taught Roger Law. So he knew my dad was a natural history illustrator, and whilst I was doing things in an overly pernickety, fiddly sort of way, he'd used to come tiptoe over to it and whack me on the shoulder and say, "This isn't a fucking natural history show," because I'd be doing these little dainty little scales on fish or something like that. But eventually, I got to make some things that were a bit broader and funnier and looser. This is what been my big sort of drawing and artistic journey, is to try and loosen up a bit. Whilst I was working there, I also worked on a magazine called Raw Vision, which was about self-taught art and folk art. And they had showed amazing work by people like Henry Darger, who does some of those spooky drawings, Johann Hauser, who I love as well. And I also went on various trips to the States. This is a drawing by somebody called John R. Mason. There he is. And R.A. Miller, who he does kind of childlike drawings, but actually there's something strangely adult about them at the same time. This is one up in my sitting room that I bought from him. So he draws prehistoric animals. And also I love eBay drawings. Got this one a couple of years ago. Kinky, a few kinky ones. Little tiny hands. That's always a problem with life drawings, is hands being too small. Now, Instagram is so great for drawing. I mean, it's great for art. People worry about it, about people projecting, their lifestyles and everyone getting jealous and upset about it. But for artists, I think it's just brilliant. It's very democratic. You come across the most strange things. And also, I've bought quite a lot of art and sold art via, I just bought this the other day, and sold art via Instagram. This is something I wouldn't be able to buy. This is Lucian Freud's drawing of Francis Bacon. I've always thought this is one of my favourite drawings. I walked into Sotheby's about a year ago, and there it was on the wall. If I had, I don't know what it'd be like, 200,000, you could literally buy this drawing. I was quite amazed to see it. Francis Bacon famously didn't do any drawing at all. He just worked straight onto canvas. But you can see there's obviously a lot of drawing going on in his painting. The difference between drawing and painting is a very subtle one, and they overlap, obviously. That's someone else who I really love. She's called Alice Neal. You might know her paintings, but she was did some beautiful drawings as well. David Hockney, of course. He's just a god in terms of the sort of drawing that I like to do. That's a book that I got out from a library when I was a teenager, written by someone called Marco Livingstone, who I've got to know subsequently, and he did this drawing of me. And this drawing of me, not to scale, of course. He got parts of it totally wrong. Whilst we're on the subject of filth, Grindr has been absolutely brilliant for getting models. I couldn't believe my luck. I was on it for a bit for the usual sort of reasons that people use it, and it was I wasn't entirely comfortable with that, so I just said, I'm looking for models, and I got some great guys turning up, taking their clothes off, and me ogling at them for half an hour, and got a chance to draw them. Yes. Then I got a boyfriend, so unfortunately I've had to go off Grindr, much to my chagrin. But I still do lots of life drawing. So what I would say is that, life drawing was very unfashionable, maybe 80s, 90s, and people don't do it in art school much anymore, but there's loads of classes all around London, above pubs and all sorts of places, where you can do life drawing. And I think it's a really fascinating thing to do. I do loads of these sort of drawings. Pen and ink ones go quite nicely, but they're quite tricky to do and so easy to get proportions wrong. I mean, I'm fussing to some extent about proportions, but often the drawings that I like best by other people in the class are completely out of proportion and done by total non-artists. So I think it's a big, there's always people say, I can't draw, whatever that means. I really don't think there's any such thing. In a life drawing class, when I walk around, we usually put all our drawings down at the end of the class. It's usually the very worst, in inverted commas, or the very best that I'm interested in. There's a whole load of mediocre ones in the middle, but there's still a really interesting process someone's gone through to come to that conclusion in their drawing. This guy, I love his drawings. Every week he's at life drawing and does the most strange drawings. And when I talk to him about it, he talks about them as if they're like a completely normal representation of a person. It's amazing. I don't know what he's seeing, really. But they're most fantastic drawings. This was a great idea. I don't know if you saw that. David Shrigley? He made this model that was completely out of proportion. So like most life drawings are out of proportion, it would automatically be out of proportion when you drew it. So these days, I'm doing a lot of drawing at home. Can't get my models anymore through Grindr, unfortunately. But I get them through Instagram. People say, and if anyone here would like to be drawn by me, please volunteer. Talk to me afterwards. This is someone that I actually made a sculpture of them before I drew their portrait. I'm trying to do these very sort of simple drawings as well at the same time, but it's so tempting to ruin a drawing by going on too long. There's a guy I draw who's at St. Martin's at the moment who's studying fine art. We were having a chat, and he just said he was a bit stuck with his work. And I said, do you do any drawing? And he said, no, that's not part of my practice. For a lot of conceptual people, they'd hardly draw anything anymore. And I thought, well, absolutely fine. There's no need to, but it's a little bit of a shame, because the great thing with drawing is that you can just get on with it. You don't need a clever idea. The pressure to have clever ideas if you're contemporary fine artist doing conceptual things is really tough, I think. And drawing, you can just get on with it. That's really my sort of... I don't expect everyone, like, going back to my parents and all that lot, they were totally hands-on, and so am I, really. Everything's changed, but this is still basically how I feel, in quite an old-fashioned way, that I go into my studio or do drawing, and it's all done by me, by my hands. It takes a long time, but it's not really an idea that I could tell someone else to make. It's important to me that the good thing about it, I hope, is that I'm the person who's done it. That's Mr. Bingo, pulling an expression. Expressions are fun to do. Just a couple more slides now. One of me. I try to pull like a nice face, but it's gone like that. Another guy I draw who I asked him why he poses for me, and he said, because it's like a meditative practice. And I thought that's very true. Even just posing, it's a kind of enforced relaxation that he gets from it. This is a sculpture that I've just made of David Hockney. It was commissioned, and he's got a little cigarette there, which I was very pleased with. So I made a whole load of fake cigarettes, which I give to people when they pose for me. So if anyone here fancies having their portrait done, you can get one of these fake cigarettes. Thanks a lot.